All of us dream of a long life without illness. Never have people lived as long as they do today, and had access to such good medical care. To get where we are today, doctors courageously broke one taboo after the other in their battle against disease and death. They made groundbreaking discoveries and dared to undertake dangerous experiments on human subjects. When families get together, they all tend to talk about the same thing: their health. Which of the children had the worst case of scarlet fever or chicken pox? Which of the older family members just underwent the most dangerous surgery? There's often a second birthday to celebrate. How is the pacemaker keeping up with your love life? How is it going with the new kidney? None of them is actually a doctor, but everyone is an expert, and each person has a story to tell. Not all of them have a happy end, but after all, family gatherings are about celebrating. Even today, every stage of life still harbors its own dangers to life and limb. Just 100 years ago, few people would have managed to grow so old. It was only a warning shot, thank God. Martin recovered from his light heart attack and is doing well these days. At 55, he can now celebrate a new lease on life. After the heart attack, he now has to go in for a regular stress ECG to check up on his cardiovascular system. Is his heart rhythm regular? What is the old pump still capable of at 80 watts? How high is his blood pressure? The number one cause of death is still cardiovascular disease. The heart has always been seen as a symbol for the soul and the mind, but in reality, it's only a muscle, responsible for pumping life-giving blood through our bodies. Bloodletting is one of the oldest therapies known to medicine. In ancient times, people believed that illness was caused by an imbalance in the four humors, or bodily fluids, and used bloodletting to rid the body of this excess fluid. In the 17th century, bloodletting became a fashionable therapy, good against anything and everything. The doctors used diagrams of the body to determine exactly where to apply their knife or leech. But everything that had been taught about blood in the heart for more than 1,000 years was called into question in 1615 by William Harvey, chief physician to the English king. Harvey drained the blood of living animals to demonstrate a simple equation.
It's perfectly clear. If, with every heartbeat, even 1 single gram of blood leaves the heart, more blood must flow through the heart during one whole day than can possibly be generated anew in the body, as Galen proposed.
And for humans, Harvey extrapolates that each day an unbelievable 7,000 liters would have to be produced. In a non-bloody experiment on humans, Harvey proves to his students at the Royal College of Physicians that the blood is not continually produced afresh in the liver.
It occurred to me that it might be a large-scale circulation instead. Arteries carry the blood away from the heart. Veins bring it back. The blood flows continually, and the heart's only job is to pump the blood through the body.
It was not until 1628, 13 years later, that he dared to publish his findings. De motu cordis, on the motion of the heart and blood.
I trembled lest I have mankind at large for my enemies, because what I had to say was something no one had ever heard before.
Harvey was denounced as the circulator. But as proof of the large-scale circulation, he commissioned these unique wooden panels. He had the entire vascular network removed from corpses, prepared and mounted. Harvey's revolutionary discovery of the heart as motor did not, however, have any consequences for medical practice during his own time.
Harvey's discovery did not bring about any immediate therapeutic changes. This was because he himself was convinced that his discovery of the circulation of the blood explained and justified all the standard therapies. It explained how the body worked. It explained why letting blood in one part of the body reduced tension in another.
This artistic wax rendering of the circulatory system was made in the 18th century. With the discovery and description of the large-scale circulation of the blood, Harvey managed to shake up the very foundations of medicine. His revolutionary teachings on the motion of blood through the body would finally find wide acceptance in science at the end of the 17th century.
Harvey settled forever the question of the relationship of the beats of the heart to pulse. He also gave us the idea of the heart as a sort of machine, as a sort of pump. And he transformed people's view of the body into something that could be described in terms of mechanics or physics or chemistry.
Harvey's understanding of the human as machine gave medicine invaluable new impulses. This insight ultimately led to the concept of the artificial heart at the end of the 20th century. Whenever something is pumped, pressure is created. Out of a bicycle inner tube and a rubber balloon, Scipione Rivarocci from Italy created the first device for measuring blood pressure in 1896. It measures the pressure in the main artery of the arm. A mercury column adapted from a barometer shows whether the blood pressure is too high or too low. If the column is under 120, the diagnosis is low blood pressure. For those with low blood pressure, Rivarocci recommended a brush massage to stimulate the circulation. The normal value is 120 RR. Today, blood pressure is still measured in Rivarocci's units. When the body loses too much blood, it must be replaced. Otherwise, death is inevitable. As first aid, an infusion of saline solution can restabilize the circulation until the life-saving donor blood arrives on the scene.
Give her the blood.
It was only 20 years ago that physicians finally found a way to undertake blood transfusions without major risks. But blood is a very special fluid. As early as the 17th century, doctors were experimenting with transfusions in dogs. Experienced in bloodletting, they also soon managed to conduct blood from one animal to another. Why not also rescue people from death with animal blood? But the transfusion always had fatal results. Then, physicians tried to transfer blood from one human to another. This was also no better than Russian roulette. Every second person died during blood transfusion arm to arm. The blood could not be mixed. It clotted. In 1901, at the Vienna Institute of Pathology, Karl Landsteiner set out to solve the riddle of agglutination, the deadly clotting of blood. He took blood from himself and 5 colleagues in order to mix each sample with every other one. In some cases, the red blood cells clotted. In a transfusion, this would spell certain death. But other samples could be mixed without agglutination. This blood was suitable for exchange. Landsteiner found out that there were 3 different blood groups, A, B, and O. The rare AB group was discovered by a colleague. On November 14, 1901, Landsteiner announced his discovery in the Vienna Clinical Weekly, a magic moment in medicine. Ever since then, a blood group test has made it possible to establish incompatibilities and prevent fatal agglutination. When in 1940, Landsteiner also discovered the rhesus factor, safe blood transfusions were finally possible. If a mother and father do not have the same rhesus factor, this can have deadly consequences for their second child. Landsteiner's revelation made complete transfusion of the blood possible. The life of the newborn child could now be saved. In 1937, serologist Karl Landsteiner was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Thanks to his discovery of the ABO blood group system, hundreds of thousands of soldiers survived World War II. But the wounded required a steady supply of donor blood from all blood groups, until American doctors made another life-saving discovery during the war. In an emergency, blood plasma alone, without blood cells, is sufficient to maintain circulation, and blood plasma from any blood group can be used. Doctors soon developed a procedure for the industrial production of blood plasma. It consists of 93% water, enriched with vital proteins, salts, and minerals. For the first time, emergency procedures and operations could be performed without being dependent on blood donors and matching blood groups. Ever since Harvey, we know that the heart is a pump in the machine that is man. The heart is controlled by electrical impulses. This fact was discovered by accident by an Italian physician in a thunderstorm that took place in autumn 1786. Luigi Galvani, from his experiments with frogs, concluded that there is electricity within living things. It sends impulses to the muscles, making them contract. The electricity in the heart muscle is rendered measurable by the electrocardiogram, invented by Dutch doctor Willem Einthoven. His first electrocardiograph was as big as a room. In 1895, he began to experiment with measuring the electrical currents in the human heart.
With a great deal of effort and hard work, we have succeeded at making a clean and jolt-free recording of the action currents of the heart.
Einthoven named his ECG apparatus the string galvanometer, after Galvani, the discoverer of electricity in the body. His patients had to put their arms and legs in tubs of water. Then electrodes were attached to their skin. This enabled him to measure the activity of the heart from the surface of the body. Einthoven examined 5,000 patients, both healthy and sick, and measured their heart currents. He found out that every illness had its own typical curve. Ever since then, doctors have been able to diagnose cardiac dysrhythmias, coronary illnesses, and heart attacks using Einthoven's curves. The ECG is among the most important diagnostic methods available to modern medicine. Electricity can also save lives. What Galvani discovered in frogs has been used by doctors since 1952 for the benefit of humans. When the heart stops beating, a defibrillator can be used as an emergency procedure to get it started again. A strong surge of electricity brings the heart dead back to life. The pump starts up again. Exercise will be the death of me. After his heart attack, Martin would be better off dropping his favorite saying. Exercise, exercise, and more exercise. It's good for the heart. A gift from the heart. Something for your heart. How are your kidneys doing? That's something you shouldn't take lightly. Once Harry's life was in danger. But today, he still gets along pretty well with one malfunctioning kidney between dialysis appointments. When the kidneys fail, death soon follows. The human body can't survive longer than 2 weeks without at least one functioning kidney, unless it is hooked up to an artificial kidney every 2 or 3 days for 4 to 5 hours. Such patients are dependent on dialysis nurses and doctors for the rest of their lives. The blood is drawn through cannulae into the artificial kidney in order to rid it of toxins. In healthy people, toxic substances are filtered out by the kidneys and eliminated in the urine. When the kidneys fail, this task must be taken over by a machine. The world's first dialysis station was set up in Seattle in 1962, at first with only 3 beds. Back then, the patients still had cannulae permanently installed in their arms. Their blood could not be cleansed on an outpatient basis, as is done today. Instead, they were confined to their hospital beds, hooked up to an artificial kidney for years. Today, kidney patients can thank Dutch doctor Willem Kolff for saving their lives. During the Second World War, he came up with the idea of building an artificial kidney. Here is his first design for the blood cleaning machine he invented in 1941, which would someday save millions of lives. Kolff's invention was connected with the tragic fate of one of his patients.
22-year-old Jan Bruning, the son of a farmer from a village near Groningen, died of an acute kidney infection. He was only 5 years younger than Kolff. And Kolff thought to himself, if I had only been able to filter the toxins out of his blood, he would have been healthy again by the next day. Kolff developed a machine to take over the function of the failing kidney. The death of the young Jan Bruning had made a big impression on him.
De dood van Jan Bruning heeft grote indruk op Kolff gemaakt.
With the prototype of his blood cleaning machine, Kolff was able to save the life of his first patient in 1943, the ailing Sophia Schaafstadt. But war in Europe temporarily halted the start of series production of the dialysis machines.
Als die nieren ermee ophielden, ging je per definitie dood.
When the kidneys fail, the person inevitably dies within 2 to 3 weeks. That's the life expectancy. The artificial kidney was a medical revolution. That's how it was seen at that time as well. But right after the Second World War, people had other problems to deal with. They were busy just trying to survive. And therefore, Kolff did not receive the support he had hoped for, and did not have enough money to continue his research.
Om zijn onderzoek voor te zetten.
Willem Kolff decided to go to America, where he taught doctors how to perform dialysis. But there were nowhere near enough places for the many kidney patients who needed help. Therefore, a committee at the Artificial Kidney Center in Seattle had to decide who would receive treatment and who would not. They reported anonymously on the ensuing struggles with their conscience.
When I was appointed to this committee, I was really concerned about how I would deal with making decisions about life and death.
I feel that in our economy and our time is just unacceptable that we have to decide about a patient's future, particularly if it's life or death, depends only on a mechanical thing. And that's just one of the things that I hope will end very soon.
I can recall one meeting where we had 4 candidates and only one place. They were all terminal cases. As a matter of fact, it made me feel better that our decision was unanimous.
Today, no doctor needs to make decisions about life and death anymore, like back in the early days of dialysis. There is an artificial kidney available for every patient. The principle by which toxins are filtered out of the blood and the blood is cleaned is the same one that Kolff invented in 1943, although his washing tub had now shrunk to a 6-inch tube.
Ik denk dat het ontwikkelen van een kunstmatige nier
I think the artificial kidney is one of the most significant developments of 20th century medicine. Thanks to Kolff, we discovered that it is possible to drain the blood out of the body, cleanse it, and channel it back into the body again, and to do so without harming the patient in any way. This was what gave rise to the idea of replacing other human organs with artificial ones. The artificial kidney prompted the development of the heart-lung machine. If one could cleanse the blood outside the body, it must also be possible to supply the lungs and the heart with oxygen from outside.
Mogelijk gemaakt, de ontwikkeling van de hart-longmachine.
The age of transplantation had begun. The first attempts at transplanting kidneys were undertaken by American surgeons in the early 50s on dogs. Removing the kidneys was easy. The animals lived for a few days with the transplanted kidneys, but then their bodies rejected the foreign organs. A pioneer of kidney transplantation was the surgeon Joseph Murray. He also struggled with organ rejection, but he didn't give up.
The reason we kept on was quite simple. These patients with kidney disease were young, and they were dying. And if you could only just give them another kidney, you might save their lives. And the fact that persons have 2 kidneys meant that one could be expendable. And therefore, it isn't like you had 2 hearts or 2 livers.
Murray dared to try out the operation on a human patient on December 23, 1954. He transplanted a healthy kidney from donor Robert Herrick into his dying twin brother, Richard.
Well, Richard was miraculously changed into a normal person. Overnight, he was hungry. He had a spark to his eye. It was incredible. We didn't know how long it was going to last. We'd hoped that it would be permanent, but it did survive. He did survive. And within a few weeks, he left the hospital. And he married the nurse that took care of him. He had children. And incidentally, 2 of the daughters are currently working in dialysis centers in New England.
The new kidney. Today, over 20,000 kidney transplants are performed year for year in the United States alone. But the waiting lists are long. And it's not always as easy to find a suitable donor kidney as it was in the case of the twins. Because transplantation requires that the tissues of the donor and receiver be compatible. This is determined by a blood test. A rejection reaction can be suppressed by administering certain medications. Blood suffuses the donor kidney. And then, the first drop of urine. The kidney is working. Another life saved. For his daring pioneer work, Joseph Murray was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1990.
The one thing that I'm sure of is that the future will depend on physicians and scientists who love humans and not more than they like themselves.
There will never be enough donor organs available to replace those that fail. Many kidney patients will have to depend on the artificial kidney for the rest of their lives. In the United States alone, there are almost 300,000 dialysis patients, and the number is growing. Going in for blood cleaning 2 or 3 times a week. Even those with kidney problems can indulge in the occasional celebration. Why don't you just apply it directly to your hips? Aunt Millie tries to ignore this quip. She should actually be keeping her distance from the rich, sugar-laden cake. But an irresistible craving for sweets is simply in my genes, she says. Then I'll just inject a few more units today. A prick in the finger to measure blood sugar. For most diabetics, just part of everyday life. Part of living with a dysfunctional pancreas that fails to produce enough insulin to break down the sugar in their blood. If the blood sugar level reaches 207, the diagnosis is diabetes. Diabetes was already recognized in ancient times. Bees made the diagnosis. They ignored the urine of healthy people and swarmed to the urine of those with the sugar disorder. The ancients named the illness diabetes mellitus, honey-sweet urine. Examination of the urine was once the prime diagnostic method. Odor, taste, and color betrayed the disorder of the urine snoops and piss prophets, as they were called. The fatal disease was easy to recognize, but not so easy to cure. In order to keep the blood sugar level low, some doctors tried in desperation to prolong sufferers' lives with radical starvation diets. As in the case of Leonard Thompson, for the ailing 13-year-old diabetic, death seemed imminent. In 1921, a young physician from the University of Toronto requested a laboratory and an assistant during summer vacation. He was obsessed with the idea of finding a cure for diabetes. Frederick Banting attempted to obtain a certain fluid from a canine pancreas, insulin. Insulin is responsible for processing sugar in the body. Just as in humans, in healthy dogs, insulin is produced by the so-called island cells in the pancreas. Banting had the idea of replacing the missing insulin with foreign insulin. In order to carry out the experiment, Banting and his partner Best first made healthy animals diabetic and then tested the effect of insulin injections. Marjorie, test animal number 33, survived for 70 days. Had Banting and Best found a cure for diabetes in dogs? Would they also be able to save human lives? Leonard Thompson is lying in his bed at General Hospital in a diabetic coma. On January 11, 1922, Banting and Best decide to undertake a last-ditch effort to save his life. A doctor injects the boy with insulin. If he awakens from the coma, this would indicate that they are on the right track. They would then be able to save the lives of all diabetics with insulin injections. Two hours of anxious watching and waiting, and then the miracle. The insulin slowly brings Leonard out of the diabetic coma and back to life. Banting and Best are the first to succeed at finding a remedy for diabetes. Their colleague James Collip was also experimenting with insulin, but instead of dogs, he used cattle. Large quantities of cattle pancreases are discarded every day at slaughterhouses all over the world. The poor quality of the insulin obtained from the canine pancreases caused problems. Banting and Best brown brew frequently caused dangerous abscesses in the patients receiving injections. Collip had been commissioned by the director of the university laboratory, MacLeod, to produce pure insulin. The biochemist was finally successful in this endeavor. His insulin shots saved the lives of countless diabetics. Young Leonard Thompson will also live another 14 years thanks to insulin. But at the Toronto laboratory, there's a war underway. In March 1922, a fight breaks out over who the real inventor of insulin is. Banting fears that Collip is trying to steal his fame and accuses him of sabotage. But since it's a case of life and death for millions of diabetics, Collip, Best, and Banting finally made peace.
It was finally possible to help diabetics, and this was of course a fascinating development. We shouldn't forget, although many say today that diabetes is a widespread disease and complain about its prevalence, this is after all a consequence of this great triumph in medicine. 100 years ago, people who today live out their lives as diabetics would have died much earlier and not appeared in the statistics. A paradox that is not really a paradox at all. For ethical reasons, we actually should rejoice at what medical research has made possible.
In 1923, MacLeod, the director of the laboratory, and Banting won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. They shared their prize and the fame for the discovery of insulin with Best and Collip. The American Eli Lilly Company already began mass production of insulin in June 1922. Thousands of diabetics were just begging to be supplied with this miracle cure. By the end of 1923, 60 million units had already been produced. For several decades, insulin was still produced from cattle pancreases, according to Collip's method, until genetics came to the aid of the biochemists. They incorporated a gene taken from the human pancreas into coli bacteria. The gene stimulates the bacteria to produce insulin. Using this method, insulin can be produced in virtually unlimited quantities. Worldwide, almost 200 million diabetics are dependent on insulin, and their ranks are growing rapidly. Since the momentous discovery back in 1922, a daily injection protects diabetics everywhere from the deadly diabetic coma. With the help of her doctor, Millie has been able to keep her disease under control. If it only weren't for her sweet tooth. Millie always says, "Take it easy for a change." You know, all that stress is going to upset your stomach. But you don't have to be a manager to get ulcers. Endoscopy is among the least pleasant of examination methods. Without any anesthesia, a flexible tube is pushed down the esophagus and into the stomach to search for bleeding, ulcers, or even cancer. But at least gastroscopy eliminates the initial need for an operation. This technique was invented in 1868 by the German physician Adolf Kussmaul. As usual, the Wolfshöhle Wine Tavern in Freiburg is packed tonight. A showman is performing a feat that astounds the audience. He swallows a sword with a solid 2-foot blade. Adolf Kussmaul has hired him tonight and offered him a generous tip because he wants to try out something special with him. He has had a pipe built to his specifications. He's been pondering for a long time how to provide more timely diagnosis on patients with stomach complaints. The sword swallower pushes the pipe deeper and deeper into his body.
I tried in vain to see something at the bottom of the dark pipe, but the endoscope's light proved insufficient.
But the idea of gastroscopy had been born. As soon as a way was found to conduct light through the tube, the interior of the digestive system could be examined. Early films of the unpleasant procedure. As Kussmaul had already realized,
the bend in the esophagus can only be overcome if the head and throat are held in the exact right position. This bend is the greatest challenge for gastroscopy.
There was a great risk of injury when the physician tried to get a picture from outside of what was going on inside the stomach. The patient had to lie there as stiff as a poker because the pipes were rigid, as thick as a water pipe, a whole ½ inch in diameter, and an agonizing 26 inches long. Thanks to the endoscope, though, many an ulcer could be discovered before it was too late. Today, we no longer need a pipe or tube. Computer tomography lets us undertake a virtual exploration of the inside of the body. The only remedy for ulcers and stomach cancer was the operation pioneered by Viennese surgeon Theodor Billroth in 1881. Billroth was known as the Columbus of the abdominal cavity. Using the Billroth 1 or Billroth 2 methods,